30 missed calls at 4 in the morning. From your head coach, days before a World Cup final. That's not a butt dial. That's a crisis. Or maybe it's something worse. Cheslin Kolbe grabbed his phone in that dark hotel room, and his heart must have been pounding. What could possibly be so urgent? He was about to find out, and the answer would spark the biggest tactical controversy in modern rugby history. Let's back up. South Africa had just survived their semi-final, one of those brutal knockout matches that leaves your entire body screaming. The Springboks were one match away from lifting the World Cup trophy. But while Kolbe and his teammates were sleeping off the battle, the coaching staff hadn't gone to bed, not even for a minute. Rassie Erasmus and his team had been up all night in a conference room, surrounded by laptops, spreadsheets, and video footage. They were cooking up something that would either make them geniuses or get them banned from rugby, possibly both at the same time. Here was Rassie's problem, a beautiful problem, but a problem nonetheless. He had too many world-class forwards. Malcolm Marx, R.G. Sneeman, Vincent Cook. These weren't your typical benchwarmers. These were starting quality international players who could walk into most other teams' first 15s. Meanwhile, his backline was settled. Handré Pollard at fly half, De Allende and in the centers, Kolbe and Mapempi on the wings. Why waste precious bench spots on backup backs who might get 15 minutes when you could load up with forward firepower, who could physically destroy opponents in the final quarter? But rugby has rules. You need positional cover for every spot. If your scrum half goes down, you need a replacement. Traditionally, teams run a 5-3 bench split. 5 forwards, 3 backs, sometimes 6-2 if you're feeling adventurous. But 7 forwards, and only 1 back. That's not just adventurous. That's practically unheard of, except it's not illegal. And that's where things get dangerous. Rassie had found a loophole. What if one of your starting backs could cover scrum half in an emergency? Not just fake it for 2 minutes, but actually handle the position if needed. Then you could list them as your halfback cover. Stack your bench with 7 forwards. Bring on a completely fresh front row in the second half. Then bring on another fresh front row 20 minutes later. You could physically annihilate your opponent in the final 30 minutes when they're gasping for oxygen. And you're sending out players who feel like they've just finished their warm-up. The strategy was brilliant. It was also completely dependent on answering one question. Could Cheslin Kolbe play scrum half? Not just stand there and look lost, but actually do the job if Fef de Klerk went down injured? Because if the answer was no, this entire plan collapsed. So at 4 in the morning, with 30 missed calls lighting up his phone, Kolbe walked down the hotel corridor and found the entire coaching staff awake. Can you cover 9? Can you play scrum half? If we need you to. Because if you can, we're about to do something nobody's ever seen before.
Now hold on. Before we go further, you need to understand why the 7-1 bench split is so controversial. It's not just about having more forwards on the bench. It's about fundamentally changing what substitutions are supposed to be. Traditionally, your bench is insurance. Your backup fly half gets injured, you've got cover. Your winger pulls a hamstring, you've got a replacement. The bench exists to maintain your structure when things go wrong. But Rassie wasn't using his bench as insurance. He was using it as a weapon. Think about it like this. In the first half, you're playing against 15 relatively fresh players. It's physical, it's brutal, but everyone's operating at roughly the same level of fatigue. Then around the 50-minute mark, substitutions start happening. Normally, both teams bring on a couple of forwards, maybe energy levels dip a bit for everyone. But it's manageable. Now imagine your opponent brings on not 1, not 2, but 3 completely fresh forwards. Then 20 minutes later, 3 more. By the 70th minute, you're running on empty and they've got players who literally haven't broken a sweat yet. Your props have been scrummaging for 70 minutes. Their props just arrived 5 minutes ago. How is that fair? Former coaches, legendary players, Northern Hemisphere rugby traditionalists. They all said the same thing. This isn't rugby, this is exploitation. You're supposed to pick your best 15 and maybe have 5 or 6 quality replacements. You're not supposed to engineer a situation where you can cycle through 3 entirely fresh front rows in one match. It goes against the spirit of competition. It turns rugby into a war of attrition rather than a test of skill. Matt Williams, the former Scotland coach, didn't hold back. He called it against the spirit of the game, said the Springboks were abusing the bench. Others went even further, suggesting the laws needed immediate changes to prevent this from ever happening again. The argument went something like this: rugby is supposed to reward the best 15 players, not the best 23. If you make the bench too powerful, you're rewarding depth over excellence. You're turning rugby into a sport where money and resources matter more than individual brilliance. Because let's be honest, not every nation can afford to develop 8 world-class props. South Africa can, New Zealand can, France can. But what about Fiji? What about Japan, Georgia? You're essentially creating a system where wealthy unions can bully smaller nations through sheer roster size. But Rassie had a counter-argument. Nothing in the laws says you can't do this. The laws state you must have positional cover. If Kolbe can cover scrum half, then he's legitimate cover. Everything else is just strategy. Is it his fault that he's built a squad deep enough to rotate elite forwards? Is it his problem that other nations haven't invested in forward depth the same way? And here's the thing. It's not like South Africa was the first team to think creatively about bench composition. New Zealand had been rotating their forwards aggressively for years. England had experimented with 6-2 splits. The Springboks just took it one logical step further. Let's get back to that hotel room. Kolbe said yes. Of course he said yes. You don't turn down your coach at 4 in the morning 2 days before a World Cup final. But this wasn't just blind loyalty. Kolbe had actually played scrum half before. Back in his youth rugby days, back when he was still trying to prove that a smaller guy could make it in professional rugby, he'd covered multiple positions. He understood the basics. Pass left, pass right. Get the ball away quickly. Box kick if needed. Don't try to be a hero. If Faf went down, Kolbe could step in for 10 or 15 minutes while they reorganized. It wouldn't be pretty, but it would work.
South Africa would walk into the World Cup final with 7 forwards on the bench. 1 back, Cheslin Kolbe listed as scrum half cover. The rugby world had no idea what was coming, but they were about to find out, and some of them would never forgive Rassie for what he'd done. Once the controversy became public, the criticism started rolling in from every direction. Coaches, former players, journalists from London to Dublin to Paris. They weren't just upset about the tactic itself, they were upset about what it represented. Rugby has always prided itself on being different from other sports. There's a culture of respect, of tradition, of playing the game the right way. And here was Rassie Erasmus, this South African coach, with a history of pushing boundaries, essentially saying those traditions didn't matter. If the laws allow it, I'm doing it. Deal with the consequences. The argument went beyond just tactics. People claimed this was going to ruin rugby at every level. If professional teams can use 7-1 splits, what about amateur clubs? What about school rugby? Are we teaching young players that the game is just about overwhelming opponents with fresh legs, rather than outsmarting them with skill and strategy? It felt to many like rugby was losing something essential about its identity. But flip the script for a moment. From a South African perspective, this criticism felt like complete nonsense. The Northern Hemisphere had dominated rugby for decades, through superior resources, better facilities, bigger budgets. Now that a Southern Hemisphere team found a tactical innovation that worked, suddenly it was unsportsmanlike. Come on. Besides, it's not like South Africa invented forward-dominated rugby. The entire identity of Springbok rugby, for generations, has been built on enormous packs, brutal scrums, and physical intimidation. The 7-1 split wasn't a betrayal of South African rugby. It was the purest expression of everything they'd always believed in. And here's something nobody talks about enough. The 7-1 split requires incredible trust. You're asking your backs to play 80 minutes with almost no relief. You're asking a winger to cover scrum half, a position he hasn't seriously played in years. You're betting everything on your forward depth. If one of your backs gets injured early in the match, you're in serious trouble. If Kolbe had needed to actually play scrum half for 30 minutes, would it have worked? Maybe. Rassie was willing to take that risk, because he believed in his players and his system. That's not exploitation. That's conviction. That's trust. The debate raged for weeks afterward, then months. It's still going on right now if you look in the right places. World Rugby eventually examined the laws but didn't change them. Why? Because technically there's nothing wrong with what South Africa did. The rules require positional cover. Kolbe provided that cover. The fact that he never had to actually play scrum half is completely irrelevant. If you want to stop teams from doing this, you need to rewrite the laws. But how do you write a law that prevents creative tactics without stifling innovation entirely? Do you mandate that bench players must get a minimum number of minutes? Do you restrict the number of front row replacements allowed? Every solution creates new problems. Every restriction takes away some element of coaching freedom. Meanwhile, other teams started copying the tactic. Not always 7-1, but 6-2 became far more common almost immediately. Coaches around the world realized that if you've got the depth, why not use it? Rassie Erasmus had accelerated that evolution with a 4 in the morning phone call and a complete willingness to ignore what everyone else thought was acceptable, depending on which day you asked them.
So where does this leave us right now? Years later, the 7-1 split isn't just accepted anymore, it's becoming standard practice at the highest levels of the game. South Africa continued using variations of it in subsequent competitions. New Zealand experimented with it. France tried it during the Six Nations. Ireland considered it. The tactic that was supposed to destroy rugby's soul is now just another option in the coaching playbook. Which raises a genuinely interesting question. Were all those critics wrong? Or did the game just adapt like it always does? Here's the truth that nobody wants to say out loud. Rugby has always evolved through controversy. The introduction of professionalism in the 90s, people said it would ruin the amateur spirit and destroy club rugby. Didn't happen. The evolution of defensive systems that made tries harder to score, people said it would make rugby unwatchable and boring. Didn't happen. Lifting in the line out, blasphemy when it was first allowed. Every major tactical innovation gets called unsportsmanlike right up until the moment everyone else starts doing it too. The 7-1 split is just the latest example in a very long history. But let's not pretend there aren't legitimate concerns here. The gap between wealthy rugby nations and developing rugby nations is growing wider every year. Countries with resources can develop incredible depth across their squads. Countries without those resources are stuck with their best 15 players and hope nobody gets injured. When South Africa brings on their 6th fresh forward in the 70th minute, they're not just displaying smart coaching, they're displaying economic advantage. That's genuinely uncomfortable to acknowledge, but it's absolutely true. Rugby has always had inequality built into its structure, but tactics like the 7-1 split make that inequality more visible and more decisive than ever before. Cheslin Kolbe never had to play scrum half in the final. Faf de Klerk stayed healthy for the full 80 minutes. The 7-1 split worked exactly as Rassie had planned it. Fresh forwards came on in waves. The opposition tired as the match went on. South Africa won convincingly. Rassie didn't invent the 7-1 split to make friends in World Rugby. He invented it to win a World Cup. Mission accomplished. The debate about whether it's actually good for rugby will continue. Traditional rugby supporters will keep arguing it's against the spirit of the game and undermines what makes rugby special. Progressive coaches will keep arguing its tactical evolution and natural adaptation. But here's what absolutely nobody can argue about. That decision made in a hotel room at 4 in the morning, with a half-asleep Cheslin Kolbe trying to process 30 missed calls from his coach. For better or worse, rugby in the modern era now includes the 7-1 bench split as a legitimate and increasingly common strategy. Teams plan for it, coaches prepare their squads for it, players train for it, and somewhere right now Rassie Erasmus is probably already working on the next innovation that'll make everyone angry all over again. Because that's exactly what he does. He pushes boundaries, he ignores criticism, he wins, and then he waits patiently for everyone else to catch up.